federal government sent out what they were going to give to each state. The state then had to send in a plan to the federal government. Then the state asked the districts to submit plans. And throughout all of those steps, there was stakeholder engagement required. So whether they did surveys or had full focus groups, there was some form of the community that needed to be brought into these conversations. So that's where we can really help drive some of this narrative. So I want to bring in the experts here. I want to bring in Michael and I want to bring in Lauren. As you can see, Michael is a 7th and 8th grade science teacher at the Argenziano School in Somerville, Massachusetts. And Lauren is a 2nd grade teacher at Whiteside Elementary in Lubbock, Texas. Both of them are involved in Teach Plus as either a policy fellow or a change agent. And as you can see by the bullets underneath those titles, they are very involved as well outside of what's going on in their classrooms. So these are 2 folks that are just excited about ways to get involved in education overall. So I'm going to start off with you, Michael. If you don't mind, if there's anything that you want to share with the group that I haven't added as an intro, feel free to, and then I have some questions for you.
No, I also, well, thank you very much, Cassie. Thank you much, Chris. I'm really excited to talk to everyone tonight. And also want to point out, well, I feel like I am an expert in the classroom. I'm not an expert on this stuff. So like, I want to give you my experience of how you as a teacher and educators can get your way into getting your voice heard about these topics. So like, feel free to ask questions, feel free to, just like, let us know what your concerns are and we'll kind of give you our experience and the ways that we got involved. So awesome. Yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to add, Cassie.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I want to start off with kind of a basic one when it comes to your work with Teach Plus. What drew you to Teach Plus and their work?
So a couple of years ago, I am a busy, spread thin teacher like all of us. And when there's money attached to things, it usually perks up my eyes. And there was an incentivized curriculum review with Teach Plus. And I'm a science teacher, so I really enjoy like why certain choices are made. And so there was a chance to be on a committee to review curriculum that could be chosen for science curriculum in Massachusetts and say if Teach Plus would say yay or nay, this is a good curriculum. So it was an interesting way for me to get into Teach Plus. And then once I got there, I realized that like, oh, wow, this organization really values teachers' time and opinions in a tangible way. And we got to compare the curriculum to the state standards and the national standards for science. And it was really like eye-opening that like, oh, this is how curriculum gets said, oh, we enjoy this, or we feel like this meets our standards, or it doesn't. So that was my way into working with Teach Plus. And as a middle school science teacher and an engineer by training, like I like the nuts and bolts of how things work. So I want to know like the workings behind all of those, all of these decisions. So it kind of like worked together with finding out that there was a policy fellowship this year and my interest in why these choices are made that made me apply for this Teach Plus policy fellowship. So it's kind of like, it kind of hits like what the Teach Plus does and like my interests. And so they kind of overlapped, and that's why I'm doing this year and beyond.
That's awesome. And the value of teachers' time is so very important.
Yes.
And speaking of time, the thing that probably takes up the most of your time is your time in the classroom and your time preparing to be in the classroom with your students. So I'm curious if you've seen a trickle down in your classroom based on your Teach Plus work, if there's any way that's translated to your students too.
Absolutely. It was like, and I want to let you know, I didn't know what ESSER stood for a month ago. As someone who is a stakeholder, I didn't really have that information. But with my work with Teach Plus, we had been talking about some of these different focus areas, and there's teacher diversity, there's using these funds equitably. In one of our meetings, we were talking about these dollars and what they're doing and what they can be used for. And I'm like, oh, this is very interesting. 2 days later, my district had sent me a link to a survey they wanted to give to my students. And it was about how to use ESSER funds. And I'm like, wait, I had just talked about this in my policy fellowship. And now my district is actually going to poll my students and ask my students what they wanted this money to be used for. They were actually engaging with the stakeholders, the students, and long ago, like I had filled out one of these surveys as well in the beginning of the school year, and I answered it, but it kind of like glazed over it, but definitely answered it truthfully and basically like, yeah, students need more mental health support, they need more support in these ways. But when it came time to give it to my students, I took a step back and looked at it and saw that like, oh, this actually really does have value. It's not just, oh, the district is looking for a survey, fill this out, kids, and we'll get back to our lessons. I was able to talk to the kids and about where this money is coming from and how it could affect them. And more importantly, like why their answers were important. So I wanted them to actually like think about these questions. And one particular question that caught their attention is like, what's a way that could help students that were impacted by COVID? And one thing that I talked to the students about is, well, there's this question, and one of the answers is more time in school on a longer school year. And as students, of course, the majority of them are like, that's awful, we don't want to do that. But because I knew what these funds were potentially being used for, I told these students, well, maybe some of your classmates, like this is their safe place, this is where they get their meals. And it doesn't necessarily mean like you're getting out at 4 p.m. and we're going for an extra month. It means maybe more programs and more things like that. So before like you roll your eyes at that answer, like think of it, is that a possible answer? I was also able to talk to them about how this money could be used for more counselors, and all of them were like, yeah, that's a really good idea. We want more counselors, because I'm sure a lot of you run into the same problems that I do at school. We don't have enough counselors to deal with all of the built up trauma from the past year and a half and all the trauma that was there before. So letting the students like pick apart these questions, and like I totally let them slow roll it. I let them take their time on these. If they had questions about how they could answer them, like I would say, yeah, of course I'll look at your answers, I'll see if that makes sense, because I want it to be your answer and what you feel. And that the students really took it to heart, and I wanted to let them know that their voice was important and they could be advocates. And I also told them that they were in like the sweet spot for this survey, because they could understand it as seventh and eighth graders, and then they'll see the benefits when they get to the high school. I'm like, yeah, the seniors, they're probably filling out this too. They might not see as much benefit. And if you were in like 3rd grade, you might not understand a lot of this, but like you're really in this great spot to advocate for yourself. And if these kids see that their choices are getting listened to and pushed through, they're going to be just more amped up about using their voice and like speaking up about what is important to them. So hopefully it keeps going in this path. And I really love the way that my district is rolling with this now. Hopefully, it keeps going, but we'll have to see for that.
That's awesome. Thank you. I love the concept of students as their own advocates as well. And then just one final question for you for this group. What advice do you have for teachers who are looking to get involved in policy and advocacy in the work that they're doing right now?
Your voice is important. You can make a say in the decision making. Like just because you're this type of teacher or that type of teacher, you feel like, well, I'm only a paraprofessional or something. Like your voice matters. I had previously, attended some union meetings and voted, but like stay on, like, if they have the meetings, like go and listen. Like I really got into listening to union meetings during COVID because they were talking about opening up. And I had a lot of questions about ventilation about how the preparation was. And the district didn't have the answers. And it made me think like, oh, wow, I have experience. And I can say my experience. And I spoke up at some school committee meetings when there were like 300 people in line for comments, waiting to make my comments. And, I feel like it did have an impact. Also, like I said, if there are meetings, like you go to them, like you don't have to be like fully on engaged and answering all the questions, but like listening to them and seeing what's on the docket is important. That's kind of what got me into it. And also like make time for something you feel like you might not be interested in, because you never know, like you could be interested in it. And then like whenever you get exposed to these things, you just be a sponge and kind of take it in and see what strikes you and what interests you, because then you might be, using your voice to help your students more and help yourself in your school more. So yeah, it's kind of just like be open to what is possible out there.
That's awesome. Thank you. And I think that that's an awesome segue to bring Lauren into this conversation too, because Lauren has a really interesting background as well. She's involved in a lot of her unions nearby, and she's president of her association there. So Lauren, if there's anything that you want to add to your original intro, please do. Otherwise, I can hop into some questions for you.
I just want to start off by saying I'm so excited. I think it's really cool when people from the nation, around the nation, can get together to talk about issues that educators are facing and students are facing, because even though we're in different parts of the world, we still have commonalities that connect us together. And I think there's something really powerful in that. And so I am super excited. I have done some work with Esser funds that I'm already seeing the benefit of. And so I'm glad that other people are here to potentially see what they can do. And I think that is super cool. So
thank you. I'm glad to have you as an Esser hype girl. So our first question, just to get to know you a little bit better, what brought you to education, and can you share a bit about your approach to teaching overall?
Yes. So I am one of those very lucky teachers that had a mother as a teacher, and she actually was my 6th grade teacher. So I got to see, day in and out, all the hard work that goes into educating students. And my mom, as my 6th grade teacher, made me think harder than anybody has ever made me think. We did Rube Goldberg projects. We studied the wonders of the world. We did all of the things. And I realized that I wanted to make that difference in the world as well. So that was my path. I felt like I was destined to be a teacher, especially an elementary teacher. I feel like it lives in my soul. So Michael, some of the things you're talking about, I don't quite understand, but it's okay. And so really what brought me in was I realized that teachers, they have the power to change lives. And specifically, I teach reading and social studies to 2nd graders. And I just feel like reading is the platform, the gateway to success in students' lives. And so we have to figure out a way to make that exciting and relatable for kids, even kids that hate reading and have had no exposure to reading. And so really my ultimate goal for teaching is to bring in real world applications. So for example, I talk to my kids all the time and I ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they're like, oh, we want to be a football star or a singer. And so then I'm like, well, do you know you're going to have to read and write in order to do those things? And they're like, what, really? I'm like, well, if you're a famous athlete, you're going to travel around the world and you're going to have to be able to read the signs, to find the bathrooms, to know where to go, how to book your flights, how to find your hotels, how to figure out where you want to eat. And then for the writing side of things, I tell them, I'm like, guys, writing has power. In 6th grade, I actually wrote an essay about my mom being the most inspirational teacher in my life. And I ended up winning some extra money for my writing. And so I really feel like the more excitement I can bring to literacy in the classroom and use real world examples with even 2nd graders, then I'm empowering them to see the potential of their future. And that gets me just really pumped up. And it's cool to hear them say, well, what about this? And I'm like, wait, there's more. And then I can use examples from my life. I had a flight get canceled 2 weekends ago, and I had to use all my reading skills to figure out what to do. I was stuck in Boston, and I got back to Texas because I used my reading skills. So it was awesome. And the kids were like, really? And I'm like, yes, see the potential. And so we talk about that all the time. So that's how I got into education. And like I said, I'm very passionate about what I do.
Thank you. You really can feel it when you talk about it, and I love it. And one of the things that I've had the opportunity to learn about from you is that you really do a lot outside of your classroom. So I'm curious if you can share with the group more about your responsibilities outside of the classroom and what motivates you to do that. I think it really ties in. You're getting some questions in the chat about your Esser funds and the specific usages that you've had. So I'm curious what you could share there.
Yes. So in my short little bio, it said that I'm the president of my local association, the Lubbock Educators Association. I have the privilege to represent over 1,200 educators in my area. I'm also involved on the region level and the state level. So I get to kind of have impacts in a lot of places. But I really take my local presidency very, very serious. So what I do there is we have regular meetings with our members, and we hear from them because they're the teachers in the classroom, and we say, okay, what's going on? What do you think? What do you need? How can we help you? And we talk about it. And so with that, I try to convey how much power teachers actually have. And then I talk about how in my life and in my work, how I've seen that work truly end up benefiting myself, my fellow educators, and my students. So I see a lot of questions about Esser. So I'm going to kind of talk about how I use my presidency, my advocacy to impact Esser funds. So when Esser funds was becoming a thing, like Michael, our school district sent out a survey. Because of my work with my association, the Texas State Teachers Association, I knew that stakeholder input was a required piece of this. So there wasn't a lot of talk about it, but I knew that stakeholders were supposed to have a seat at the table. And I also knew all the things that could potentially be used for this funding. And so what our district did was they put out their priorities, and they said, okay, these are the things we are thinking about spending the money for. And most of them sounded really great. But one thing they did not include on there was stipends for teachers and stipends for the people actually doing the work. And so we advocated with our members. We let them know, hey, this is a possible use for these funds, because we're the ones spending the money in the classroom. We're the ones who bought extra PPE during COVID. We're the ones buying books for our kids. We're doing the work. And so kind of what our district did is they put out all of these things, because the survey went out to parents, students, educators, community members. They said, hey, let's put all these things that sound really great, but let's not tell everybody all the potential options. And so what we did with this survey is we had every educator we know go in and put their true thoughts and their true feelings. And that was give the money back to the teachers as much as you can, as well as social emotional learning funds, interventionists, like things that are actually going to benefit the students and the educators doing the work. And so because of that, our district ended up creating a plan called the 3-2-1, where for the first year, people will get $1,000, $500 in December, $500 in June. If you stay through the second year, then you get $1,000 in December, $1,000 in June, and then the next year, $1,500, $1,500. So over 3 years, educators will get an extra $6,000. And that not only helps with our teacher shortage and our teacher retention, but we know the number one indicator of student success is the teachers in the classroom. And if we keep having teacher turnover, that's not benefiting anybody. Another thing that's going on in Texas is we have this fun thing called Reading Academies, and it is a lot of work. I don't know if anybody's heard about Reading Academies, but it's the science of teaching reading, and it is a lot of unpaid professional development. Currently, I am about to start module 8, which is 9 hours long, and there are 12 modules. So it's a lot of work. Our district decided to use some of the Esser funds to pay anybody who completes it $1,000 extra, because our argument was, if you want highly effective reading teachers, then pay them for the unpaid PD that they are required to do. And so those were things that happened. And, you know, because we were educated from our association side, but also communicated with our members, we created changes that we're now seeing the benefits of. We have interventionists that come into my room and take small groups. We have people that are there to help those struggling students. We have more supports for social emotional learning, and educators feel like they can stay in the classroom because they're being compensated for all the things that they've gone through, like just name all the things. And so I think that that is really important. And another thing that I try to always reiterate is, you know, teachers should have a seat at the table. Teachers are the most credible source for talking about how to impact student outcomes. We are the ones who live it. We are the ones who are with kids every day. And if we are not the experts and we don't show people we're the experts, then they're not going to listen to us. So that's kind of what I do. It kind of ties with everything. Cassie, what other questions do you have for me?
That was awesome. And it tied into a little bit about like strategies. And I think that's where I'd love to close this out. And if I could just give one housekeeping thing before you do that, if folks wouldn't mind changing their names in their Zoom. If you don't know how to do that, there is a three little dots at the top of your screen, or the top of your bubble, your video bubble, that says rename. If you could put in the front your state abbreviation, just so I can try and lump as many folks together from the same states as possible, so that you can have more of a conversation in those breakout groups in about 5 minutes or so. So that's only housekeeping thing. And then Lauren, the question is really around, what strategies do you have when it comes to talking to superintendents, when it comes to talking to principals and your school board? I know you're working with them a lot. So what can you share with this group about the priorities of how to get your message across?
So the biggest thing that I've realized from being a local president is there's a lot of issues, and everyone thinks that their issues is the top priority in that moment and that time, because a lot of times with educators, we put our heart and soul and passion into what we do. But what I've realized is you kind of have to pick the overarching issue that's going to maybe have a rain down effect to impact other things. And so really, whatever your goal is, you have to prioritize what's going to get the most bang for your buck. Another thing is knowing that you should be allowed to have a seat at the table. So tap into your superintendent's team, call your school board members and talk to them, show up at school board meetings. You have to be a visible presence for them to realize that you're the one that they should be listening to. And the power in that is when you're visible and show that you're willing to work with your district, then a lot of times they come to you before decisions are made, not after. I always hated before I got involved that decisions were being made and you would go to a meeting and those decisions were already set in stone. But I've seen a lot of times where things have been changed or adjusted based on the things that I've been able to bring forward and my colleagues have been able to bring forward. Another thing you have to realize is you have to be very concise in exactly what you want and your solutions for that. A lot of people don't realize when you get an audience with your superintendent, at most you may get an hour. If you have time with your school board, our school board has a 3-minute speaking requirement. And after that 3 minutes is up, a timer goes off. And unless a school board member votes for you to continue, you're done. So you have to go in knowing exactly what your message is. So I always think about the elevator pitch idea. How can you make yourself the most credible person in the room? How can you show them that you're willing to work with them? And I think that also I always try to tie things back to students. I'm like, for the students, this is for the students and this is how it's going to impact them. Because when you talk about educators, they're like, yeah, but y'all are adults, like y'all are good. But when you tie it back to the impact on students, then your message significantly increases in the potential to actually make the change. The other thing that I really like to do is knowing your school board's priorities and your superintendent's priorities and using their terminology back at them. So one of our school board policies is to recruit, retain, and reward highly effective teachers. And there were some things that happened in this Esser money. And we said, if we really want to recruit, retain, and reward highly effective teachers, this is what the educators are saying they need to feel like they can stay and continue bringing in student teachers to then potentially become teachers. And so that's really how I think that I've been successful. And also knowing that when you start talking, people are going to come towards you, like they're going to listen. So when you come in and you show up with a presence that says, I am an educator, I live this work, I'm not just some outsider talking about things I know nothing about. You can say, this is the reason why I should have a seat at the table, and this is how it's going to impact my students, and this is what we can do about it. How can we work together? And I don't know, I've just seen lots of great things come out of it. I've already seen impacts on teachers and students, and Esser funds just became a thing this summer, really. And so just know that you have power in your presence, and know that because you're an educator or care about students or involved in education, you should have a seat at the table, and there's ways to make that happen.
Amen. That is a perfect segue to our breakout groups. Lauren, Michael, thank you so much for sharing with the groups. And I've tried to lump as many Texas folks and Massachusetts, New York, North Carolina together as possible, so that you can have more of those conversations that are localized. But if you're not in a group with people from your area, it is totally okay. What I want to share with you is the prompt, and you'll be given this actually in the chat in a few seconds as well. We really want to focus in on you, right? So we want to focus in on what your goal and your priorities for your classroom are. So what we're going to ask is, first, if you could share with your group, obviously introduce yourself to your group, share where you're from, and if you could share with your group what your number one priority is for your community or your school. Then we gave you, we put together a list of resources, and we want you to be able to walk away understanding your state's Esser allocation and potentially your district's allocation. If you can get there, we only have about 15 minutes, so I understand that it's tight turnaround. This is really just supposed to be helping you to have the resources to continue this work. This is a launching pad for putting together your own advocacy narrative. And the reflection questions for you are, am I able to identify outline priorities from my state and my district? And what is the best way to align my priority to create my own advocacy narrative? Similar to what Lauren was saying, speaking their language, using that terminology, better understanding exactly what those priorities look like. That will be the goal of your work moving forward. I want to recognize that it is 6:10. We're not going to have a ton of time in these rooms. We'll have about 15 minutes. So this is just going to be an introduction to this information, but we wanted to make sure that you have it. James, if you wouldn't mind, I just want to clarify the next slide, because this is what everyone will be able to have access to. So the first column here, you will see an actual breakdown of what the LEAs in your state will be receiving. It'll break it down by which Esser 1, Esser 2, because there were different waves. And then the second column, that tries to give you a little bit more detail. So there were state highlights for the majority of folks. A state like Florida was actually the last state to submit their Esser dollars, or their Esser plan. So there's just not as much resources as readily available, but all of this had to be made public. So this is just to give you examples of places that you can go to try and find this information. And the one small plug I will give for Massachusetts, for those of you who will be looking at it, the MEP toolkit is something that Chris and I have worked on with our advocate partners a lot. And it's a really great way to better understand what to do with these dollars, like the why after this. So I hope that you find this resource to be really helpful. We will jump into breakout groups now. And I will pull us back in probably around 6:26-ish for a quick wrap up, an exit ticket, and any share outs that you'd like to share with the group. So I will open the rooms and I'll see you all in a few minutes.